evening and welcome to the American University Museum at the Katzen Art Center. You are in the Alper Initiative for Washington Art, Carolyn Alper's gift to all of us. It looks pretty good here tonight with this wonderful show of Prints and Artists, WD Printmaking Workshop 1970 to present. We have a great panel. Percy Martin, you may have known Percy. He's a printmaker and myth maker. He attended the Corcoran School of Art on scholarship, and when he received a scholarship to attend graduate school at the Maryland Institute College of Art, he decided instead to stay in DC and teach young children in the public schools, and had an extremely important 30-year career in that role. His work has been exhibited in galleries throughout the USA, as well as in Africa, East Europe, and South America, and he's received many honors and awards, too numerous to mention tonight. Be here all night. Then Joyce Wellman, on the end there, began her artistic journey in the early 70s in various printmaking studios in New York, and she was mentored by a host of artists. Her paintings, drawings, prints, and mixed media works have been exhibited, and they've been exhibited here several times. They've been exhibited and collected in DC, nationally and internationally, and is in numerous public and private collections. Gail Shaw-Clemons earned her MFA in printmaking from the University of Maryland, studied under Thaddeus Lipinski, Martin Puryear, and David Driscoll. Pretty fast company. She taught at the United Nations International School in New York for 24 years, has traveled extensively, and has worked in collections as far away as China, Brazil, Ireland, and Sweden, as well as in many important regional collections. We're going to start out with a few questions for the panel. We're going to talk for a bit, hopefully have a good conversation, and then we can open it up for some discussion from the floor. So I hope that you will participate tonight. That'll make it a lot more fun. So I have just a couple of questions for Percy, first of all. Percy, where did the name WD Printmaking come from? And you have to speak right into the microphone, too. They won't hear you.
I laugh because that's one of the questions that's always asked me. And
you have to speak into the microphone.
okay, in a way, I feel like Centerfeld, the guy who invented lithography. If you've ever done lithography, all of the terms are etching terms, and they're not. When he had the chance to come up with something new, it just went by him. And when I had the chance to come up with an original name, it just went by me because I was standing in a store trying to buy some nitric. And the guy said, "Oh, sure, you can have it. What's the name of your company?" And I looked at him and I went, wow. I've been buying nitric at the Corcoran for years, but I was buying it for the Corcoran. So I had to come up with something, and I just said, WD. And the guy said, okay. And I went, wow. And that's how it was. I wish it was something else, but it's not.
Now, the story I heard was that you would look down and you saw some WD-40. Is that where it came from?
Just as good.
Well, it took 40 years to even know where it came from, so.
And then Percy, could you tell us about the Bushmen? You know, that's how I first got to meet you. I was fortunate enough to buy a print of yours from, I think, Gallery 10, and I was enthralled from then on. Maybe you can talk a little bit about where this came from.
Well, it started with me making myths and legends, and every time I would do one, someone would step out the crowd and say, no, no, that's not right. And I'd look at them and go, well, maybe they know more about it than I do. I just know what I know. And it made me really get into myths and legends. And one of the things I found out about myths and legends is that they're universal. So there is no right way to tell the Snow White story. It just depends on where you are. But I just couldn't live with people popping up out of the crowd saying, no, no, that's not right. So I said, well, I really need to present something that I know the beginning, the middle, and the end, and they can't tell me that. So that's how it started. And here again, not being one of the brilliant people in the world, I named it the Bushmen. Why? I do not know. They're not the Bushmen of South Africa. They're not the Bushmen of Australia. They're not the Bushmen of anywhere on this planet. It's from somewhere else. And I spent a lot of time explaining that to people, and sometimes they look at me and they feel real sad because they were expecting me to talk about South Africa or Australia. I don't know anything about that. I do, but I don't. Not to the point that I'm using their stories, because I don't know their stories. These are stories that are in my mind, and I always call them a mind myth. And that's what they are.
And then, what role did Gallery 10 play in your career? And DC Art in general? That was, an early, I guess, cooperative gallery in Washington.
Well, I was really lucky that Gallery 10 let me join them. It gave me an opportunity to work in a gallery from the bottom up, kind of, or the top down. Most artists only bring their work to the gallery, leave slides, and they're picked for a show. But when you belong to a co-op gallery, you learn how that a show is picked a year or two ahead of time. You also learn that you have to scrape the walls and patch them up. You know that you have to get X amount of rolls of toilet paper and the wine and all of that stuff. And you also understand that people bring their work in and that the group looks at it and they all talk about it, and you hear different opinions about what will be shown or not shown. So it was a really great experience for me as a young artist to be in that environment and to work with the ladies that were there. I was the only guy there, really. And it's an eye-opener, but then I grew up with a lot of women, so it was okay. Yeah.
Well, that's interesting because you are so great to work with, and I think it might have something to do with that experience. So it's probably would be good training for artists, everywhere to have to look at it from the other side and understand what's involved. So now yes. Talk right into your microphone.
Involving in the Washington.
Microphone here.
Oh, being involved in the DC art scene. Well, I don't know how to really answer that because I never thought about it, really. I was kind of always in my own scene, and I was in a workshop with a whole lot of different people, and we just never told each other, you have to do it a certain way. And I was at the Corcoran when it became the color school. I remember what it was like before it was the color school. So, but it wasn't no one there, even there, telling me, you have to be in the color school, although a lot of my friends and things started painting in the color school vein. But I just never thought of it that way, and no one said I had to do it, so I didn't.
So for all of you, a lot of the WD printmakers' work use imaginative pictorial storytelling, narrative, seen in Gail's Afrofuturist Time Travelers and Cyborgs and Percy Martin's Strange Creatures and Landscapes. What about WD fostered this type of storytelling? Because, it was somewhat unusual in Washington at the time. How did you find this group of people that were on the same wavelength in some respects?
They just showed up. They really did. I didn't advertise for a certain type of person.
I know when I was working on my master's is when I first started going to the studio, and I realized I have to figure out what I want to do in terms of a master's degree. So I started, I used to always make doodles, and I started blowing them up really large. And so I started doing these fantasy doodles, but only on a large scale. And by the time I went to Percy's studio and saw what they were doing, I just felt like I'm home, this is it.
My experience was a little bit different because I'm from New York, and I got here in 1979. And actually, well, my parents met and married here, and then they moved to New York where I was born. So I did have a lot of family here, but then I met someone, and I would come down I taught school in New York City. So coming to Washington really depended, cutting to the chase, to have a place to work. When I was in New York, I was at Bob Blackburn's Printmaking Workshop and with Krishna Reddy, and I studied color work too. But when I got here, I didn't know anything about the color school or anything like that. So my work, and as far as storytelling is concerned, I guess that's in my work as well. But as Percy says, it wasn't something that we were looking for, a place that had something that was saying, at least I wasn't, something that I was saying. What I needed was a place to print. And that was the most important part. And when I decided to move down here, that was really important to me. So, but WD was a place for me that when I got here, they said, I came to Percy, he was recommended. And he said, well, yeah, we have a yearly fee, and this is what it is, $250, and here's a key, come anytime you want to. So I said, okay, that's perfect. And I think that was the nature of the workshop. What made, printmaking is like that, of course. Usually it's not an idle, one person, one studio is usually a workshop where people are working together, not on the same projects, but working. And so there's a lot of camaraderie. There is a lot of storytelling anyway. We'd come in on Saturdays and have a really great time. And so it was really wonderful for me to come down when I could come and have a home to work at. And I met a lot of different artists, and I must say that Percy's workshop reminded most of what Bob Blackburn's workshop was like, which was like come and work. So I think that was the most important part about it. And the stories that come out of it, I guess everybody's kind of like a storyteller anyway, and we are likely to do that. I kind of think of my work more as abstract, but there are times when I have something I want to say directly. So I tell a story like that artist book out there. So.
But to me, it was always like they were like mad scientists, As printmakers, you're working with nitric and phosphoric acid, and everyone's got some kind of technique that they would share, and we're in a dark room, and just a lot was going on, and people were very open and willing to share whatever they knew. So that's something unique about printmakers is that, well, you have to share the same space, but you don't necessarily have to share your techniques, but they do. They enjoy doing that.
And the smell of ink is just marvelous.
And nitrous oxide is a lot of fun. So I know that Percy is in his own world, but what about everybody else in your group? How aware were you of how against the grain your work was in D.C.? This was the time of the Washington Color School, and abstraction was very much in the air. Even African American artists like Sam Gilliam and Ken Young and Alma Thomas and Martin Puryear, and they were all working abstractly. So I was wondering what you were, if you were seeing yourself in opposition, or if this was perhaps related to work coming out of Howard University. I'm wondering, how you sort of saw the world at that time.
Well, I personally didn't see them, and I still don't. All I see is my world. I mean, that may be shallow, but that's what I see. And what other people are doing, I can appreciate and enjoy, and I can see the merit, and I can see an A work, a B work, a C, D, and F work. I can see that, but it has nothing to do with me. My work is my work. Their work is their work. That's just the way I look at it.
Well, I considered myself a surrealist back then. I didn't know what Afrofuturism. I didn't, that's a whole new term for me. But I felt that my characters were African American, but they were also from another world, and they were trying to leave messages for this world that we need to get ourselves together and treat each other better and to save the environment. So that was my idea of what I was doing at the time. And I felt like I wasn't really in the in crowd anyway, so I should be able to do what I wanted to do. And because it was something that's soothing the inside of me. And I thought that's what art was. So, yeah.
And I think, too, that there were a different generation on a certain level than, say, and I came from New York where I just figured I wanted to learn as much as I could. I didn't go to art school when I first decided to become an artist. I was a teacher, blah, 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 and all that kind of stuff. So I figured I had a lot of work to do. So I didn't really have a whole lot of time to try to figure out what everybody else was doing and wanting to do it. So I just was, trying to, really just figure things out. I mean, later on I went to, I got a scholarship here and there and stuff like that and graduated from the Maryland Institute College of Art. But I was doing art already. And it was an opportunity to get a piece of paper, as the dean said. But I think I'm glad that there was so much going on in Washington, D.C., that there was room for more, that there wasn't just one thing that one had to do to be an artist. You could just really explore.
I'm loving this discussion, and I think partly because one of the purposes of the Alper space is to sort of take another look at Washington art. So many things were left out of the canon. The story that people try to tell about Washington is so one track. One-dimensional, and this is a pretty nice.
And what I want to say too about the Alper Initiative, that I'm very appreciative of it because Carol and Alper, I've never met her. I know she's an artist, and there was a time in Washington where Washington artists were fighting to have some space. The galleries weren't showing us; they weren't shown at the corporate, this, that, and the other thing. And I think it's just so wonderful that an artist decides, okay, here's the space, and this is where you're going to be. And all the shows that have happened here are historic, and that was one of the reasons that I thought WD Printmaking Workshop definitely had to be here, because it is part of the Washington art scene. I'm going to do a commercial now, but it's the truth.
You made me do it. You did. She just held me down and.
Well, thank God you were around to understand that that's really important. So I think that's part of the art scene, have not only the artists, but the people who are ready to present it and the other ones who already support it and all that kind of good stuff. That's what makes it really, Washington is special in that way. Sleepy southern town, southern hospitality, blah, blah, blah.
The thing about this show is that I can almost remember when all of these pieces were made in the other galleries. It's just like knowing what people were struggling or going through, and seeing a beginning and a middle and an end, and then seeing the whole collection all together is really amazing, because who knew we were creating history at that time? We were just listening to blues on Saturday, listening to Mike play his harmonica, and experimenting, and just in our own little world. And to see this is just really amazing.
I'd like to say something about a couple of people who are not here, Billy and Michael. When I first started, they were some of the first people to come around, and they were doing experimental things. And they weren't blowing up things, but they were doing things in printmaking that was way different than what I had learned. I really learned the old way, 13th century on up. And the first time I ran into Michael, he had an etching, and he said, the aqua tint is too dark. And it was black. And I was thinking to myself, well, he'll be here for a couple of weeks scraping that plate back. And he turned, I guess, to the left or the right and picked up a spray can. And he masked the part he wanted to keep, and he sprayed the part he wanted to take out. And I looked at him and I went, He had put plastic so that part was white when he printed it. I went, And I did a lot of that because a lot of people came through doing different things. And people would ask, well, what do you get out of this? I get that out of it. It could have taken me 20 years to figure that out. I may never have thought of it because I wasn't trained that way. But so many different people came through doing different things. Little things, big things. Some things, didn't work, but we tried it. And it was a lot of experimentation going on, a lot of it. And I miss those two guys.
In the other room particularly, there's a lot of work that shows some experimentation with new technologies. How have they affected WD's evolution? And it looks like it's been integrated into the mission of the workshop.
Well, I can talk a little bit about color viscosity etching, which basically I came to the studio doing from New York, which I first learned from Kathy Caraccio, and then Krishna Reddy. And Krishna Reddy and Louis, was it Hayter's, I got the last part of the name right. They were doing some experimentation in Paris also about how to get prints and get color separation and to do some things in a very abstract way. What Krishna was always say, this is for abstraction, but people nonetheless wanted to make, the sun shining and all that kind of stuff. He said, this is not for that. It really is for that abstract thing. So with viscosity, not that it's brand new, but it was a different way of getting color separation with one time through the press. And you had to do, still a lot of hard work. You're still working with etching your plate in a lot of different ways, having some rollers and doing some things to the ink. So it's kind of like a triad. But in short, color viscosity, the reason that you can put one color on top of another and they not mix, it's like peanut butter and jelly, right? So if you put the jelly down first, you'll never get the peanut butter down. Right? So when you put the peanut butter down first, the jelly sticks to it. And it's the same thing with the inks, that you are having like a peanut butter ink and a jelly ink. You put the jelly ink down first, and that's on the top, and the peanut butter ink, you put it down in other surfaces below. Now, why don't they mix? They do. On the roller, not on the plate. So the roller takes sort of like a thin film of ink out and leaves it because it's at the top. And the other one is a very soft roller, so it's spongy. It can go down into the deep places. But anyway, getting color separation like you wanted one time through the press was kind of like the new thing, but still not all that new. And then today, I think what Percy is doing by using the digital method just to create the plate and etching it as an intaglio anyway. And so when you look at some of those prints over there, you see multiple times printed. So it's still a 3-plate process. Am I right, Percy? Talk about it a little bit, because I couldn't understand it. I said, wait a second, no, I'm not going to do that because I want to smell ink and la, la, la. I still haven't done it, but I can understand that it's the same thing. So.
You want to say something?
Well, you go ahead and explain it.
Okay. Well, like I said, I went to school for a 13th century technique, and I am really happy that I've lived long enough to see something new. Because in etching, you can count new things. And hardly anyone lived from one to the other. But right now, going into the 21st century, there are a newer way of doing things. Solar printing is different because, one, you're not working with nitric acid, a Dutch one. Those are dangerous chemicals. And if you're not really, really careful, you can get hurt permanently. Of course, if you do etching for more than 5 years, you are very, very careful. But to bring the digital world as a tool, like a pencil or stylus is a tool, then you have something that you can work with. And to be able to work on the computer with an image, manipulate it on the computer like you would manipulate your pencil on a piece of paper, and then transfer it to a plate, and then go and put it in the sun or a source that's like the sun for a certain amount of time, and then to go to your sink and wash it out, like instead of using nitric, you use water. Then after that point, you go into your studio and you do the irregular intaglio process of putting the ink on, putting below the surface, wiping off the top, taking damp paper, putting it on the plate, and running it through a clothes wringer. Expensive clothes wringer, but a clothes wringer.
6,000
and the press. Right? Yeah. And that part hasn't changed, just that little part, but it's like a bridge. It's like the first person who got a pencil after they were using a stick in the dirt. It's just a bridge. But I feel so blessed and happy that I am at the beginning of that doorway into the 21st century in printmaking.
Well, I got my master's in stone lithography. So I was lifting 400-pound stones, and so to see the digital age come for me, I mean, I couldn't do that anymore. And so now I'm doing polyester plates, which is like a transparent piece of plastic, and you can use a computer, the toner from a Xerox machine, and then you can dampen it and ink it up as if it were a stone. That's like a night and day. And I can take my drawings, put them in the Xerox machine. I don't even have to use acid to ink them and print them. So again, you know, I used to be a purist, and everything had to be done by the book. But the digital era really can make you produce a lot faster, and there's very little difference in, you know, in working on the stone and creating a print digitally at this point.
There is a danger of getting a lot of printmakers together because they really like to talk about process a whole lot, which is fascinating, I think. for me. What do you see as WD's legacy? And how do you see it fitting into the history of art in Washington, D.C.?
But
I know you're in your own world.
no. I'm trying. I'm hoping that people who worked in the workshop and had the opportunity to see how a group of people can work together and work separate at the same time and share information can go into the world and do the same thing. They don't have to have a press, but they can share ideas and thoughts.
Well, for me, I think that WD is an important part of the art making in Washington, D.C. since 1970 and on. It's so important for people to know that D.C. is a place where art is made. And really, printmaking has a real strong place in Washington, D.C. as far as printmaking and art making is concerned. And WD being associated with the Alper Initiative and the historic collection being here means that connection between the artist, the museum, the gallery, the production, it's in what, and someone can always come forever, ever, and go through the archives and find the art that was done in Washington. The Alper Initiative Washington Art is the most wonderful thing that could have happened for us artists working and living. And WD is part of that story.
Yeah, let me just mention that because they may not know, but most of the work that you see in the other room is coming into our collection, and we'll be the custodians of a lot of this legacy. Right?
Well, I've been away for 25 years.
Yay!
I was in New York for 25 years, and I just moved back here about 4 years ago, and it's just like I never left. It just feels like, with the WD, and most people go and they go to another city, and they don't have that history, or it's not, I don't know, something different. But here, it's like I never left. I just hit the ground running, and we're all back together again.
So I think if there are any questions you'd like to ask each other first, we could, is there anything you haven't gotten out of your...
I have one question for Percy. Could you tell us, from start to finish, how WD, was the kernel, where did it come from, where did it get started, was it always on where? Tell us the story of how WD got going. And I know WD, the name came later, but the need to have a workshop, a printmaking workshop that you were putting together.
Thank you. I'm sitting here thinking about that all afternoon. I think it started in '67 at the Corcoran, where a group of us who were print students would sit around, and after complaining about all of the artists who were famous and doing well, we would turn our conversation to what we would do when we got out of school. And a lot of us wanted to have a workshop, our own workshop. And a couple of people did, but they wanted to make money. And I kept telling them, I want to have a workshop where people just came, and I wasn't interested in making money from it. I knew I would have to go get a job to support my habit. And I did. It's not as hard as people think, but it's a commitment. But it's also a dream. We had that dream. Some days I'm watching cartoons with my granddaughter, and the new cartoons, I'm looking at them and I'm going, I remember it used to be some people at school who was always on the corner doing those type of drawings, and we used to say to ourselves, my God, they'll never make it. Well, there they are. But when you're in school, you get to have dreams. And we did. And some of us, at least I did, I just think of myself as the luckiest person in the world because all these people came. You know, it's that thing about you build a field, they'll come. I built the studio and they came and they stayed. And it's been a wonderful, wonderful trip. It really has been. And I've learned so much. It's really selfishness on my part because I've learned so much. I've gotten so much out of it. And it's not about money. Art is not about money. I tell all of my students, if you go into printmaking to make money, you can do it, but they're going to arrest you for doing that. You can't make money like that. It's not about the money. It's about the art that you do. And it's the driving force that keeps me going each day.
So where was the first place that you had the workshop?
First place I had a workshop, when I got the press, it came to Baltimore, and I had to go up and get a rigging company to bring it to Washington, and I didn't have a place, so Topper Carew let me put the press, you know the Perry restaurant at 18th and Columbia Road? In the basement, that sub-basement, no one's been in that basement. They put it there for a while, and then I moved it because it didn't work there. You couldn't hardly get in there, and you couldn't get out. So we moved it to that little park on Columbia Road that's Jerome Meadows has a sculpture thing on. Right across the street from that, over top of one of the restaurants, we put the press there. And someone told me the press was a little under a ton. And they said, and I said, well, won't it fall through the floor? And they said, if you get a piece of plywood a certain thickness, it will distribute the weight. And I went, huh. And it did. And that's where we had it at first. And then when my wife and I were having twins, so we decided we couldn't live at 18th and Columbia Road, because if you think it's crazy over there now, it was really crazy back then. So we moved to Mount Pleasant, and the basement of this house that we saw a lot of houses, but this one, someone had cut the stairs from the basement to the first floor out. And I looked at it and I went, wow, this is the studio. This is the dream. This is the one where I can give people a key. My family has nothing to do with this. I don't have to worry about the twins running downstairs playing in the nitric. And that's how it got there. And that's how it got started.
Are there any questions in the audience? Yes. Maybe we can try to bring you a microphone.
Who wants to do a question? This question is for Gail Shaw-Clemons, and I've known you since 4th grade. And I remember when she was in 4th grade, and she used to draw these pictures, and it was these people with these big eyes. It was like the moon people. And I looked at her and I said, girl, don't show that to nobody, because they may think you strange. You know? So she kind of started doing her art with this type of movement. And I'm just so proud of her, because I look at how much history she has brought into the fold of what she's doing, and how much it will be around for the future, and it has a story to tell. So I just want to know, now that you're a professor at the college, and what do your students really want to focus in on, the new or the old?
What do my students want to focus on? Yeah. In terms of my work, or
in terms of their work?
Oh, in terms of their work. Well, I always ask them, if you didn't have to get up today, what would make you get up? you know. So, you know, what you have to really come up with some kind of a passion to get up. And what would make you get up if you didn't have to? And just trying to get the students to understand that as an artist, you have to soothe your soul. No one else's, like Percy was saying. You've got to do it for yourself. And you've got to be strong enough to defend what you do. But I also, I was an accounting major, however, and I changed my major. And I knew one thing for sure, is after changing my major, I had to make art work. So I never actually did anything else but art. And it's possible, but like Percy said, you know, you have to do things to support your art or to support your habit. And mine happened to be my art. So, yeah.
Yes, up here in the front.
So I'm just curious because, so I'm a graduate of Duke Ellington, the early Duke Ellington class of '78, first graduating class of the Duke Ellington. But before then, it was workshops for careers in the arts. And I know that some of the teachers in the visual art department kind of floated within the workshop. And I was wondering, what was the relationship there with, or was there even a relationship between the workshop and when, you know, Mike Malone and Peggy Caffers first started, you know, the careers for workshops in the arts, and then evolved into Duke Ellington, if there was any type of relationship there with that.
We all work together. I don't know what came first, Ellington or the studio. It's all kind of mixed up for me.
I think that Ellington came around 76, 70, 74, I mean 70, yeah, around that time for, right, careers. Much older. So it was.
Peggy did that she was at GW when I was in school, and she was thinking about that, and she did that. I knew Billy Harris worked there, and I never worked in that project, but I did work at Duke Ellington. I think almost everybody who taught art at some point drifted through Duke Ellington at some point. But they all had to leave, but that's another story.
Anybody else? Yeah, Claudia.
Hi, Percy. I know that you worked a little bit with Nosh, Christ, and Maxine. Were you working at WD Studio, or was that at Glen Echo, or what happened there?
When Nosh worked at WD, what it was, Phyllis Thompson came down from, where did she come from? Phyllis, some university. She was doing sabbatical, and she was working at the workshop, and she was offering classes, or workshop, not classes, but workshops. And Nosh Christ came with a group of her friends, and they worked with Phyllis there at the workshop.
Okay. Did you ever work with Ann Zahn? Did you ever work with Ann Zahn? Did you ever work with her?
I want to say yes, because I know Ann Zahn, but not at my workshop. She had her own place. No, but I do know Ann.
Any other questions, comments,
Maybe.
contributions? Sure.
Yeah.
I think it's one of the best shows I've seen in DC in the last, I've been here 45 years.
All right. Any other compliments? Oh, that's it.
I got plenty. First off, Percy, we've been knowing each other a long time. I was a part of WD, and I wanted to thank you and all the people associated with WD, Gail and Joyce, and we did. We had a wonderful time. And also, for me personally, Billy Harris and Michael Platt were such educators and educated me through all kinds of art. and not to be forgotten, but yes, it was a wonderful experience, and that's what I wanted to say. I will never forget it.
Have a microphone up here. Okay, one.
I just wanted to ask the educator in each of you. You mentioned that you grew up in 13th century techniques, and you mentioned the classic lithograph. How do you feel students should address that 21st century techniques? Should they learn the old stuff first? How do you, I mean, please speak to that.
Well, when I was at the Corcoran, and I was just before the color school came in, and a lot of the students started doing these beautiful color paintings. And one of the questions I asked them, you can't take that color around that canvas so many different ways. When you do all of those, what are you going to do with it? Because the original people who were doing color had ideas. They were just doing that. The original people who did color school did some older paintings. And when they ran, and not one of them are painting today. Not one of them. Matter of fact, before we got out of school, they had stopped. I tell everyone, learn the old way, and you can always build on it. But you can, and if something goes wrong in the new way, you can go back and come forward again. But if you get out there and you don't know why you're doing it or how you got to that, and something goes wrong, you can't correct it. That's my thought.
Well, I think there's something important about knowing about the past and works, because then you, of course, like Percy said, you can build from that, or you can do it. I guess today there's so many, always have been what we all are supposed to do and how it's all supposed to work and what all is the newest, greatest thing. But I don't know, I guess I think art is still a meditative kind of thing, I guess, or something like that. And if everything that you can learn, you should try it. I mean, whatever interests the person, and the dedication is the most important part. The determination to do it without an outcome like there's going to be a lot of money at the end of the rainbow. Not necessarily.
I think that I think it's important to learn the basics and at the beginning of something, and then take it from there. I find that a lot of art departments are closing down printmaking. I mean, they're not teaching any aspect of printmaking, and that's unfortunate because, like you said, I mean, you could actually survive if our power goes out and everything else. You could still make a print, you know. But if you don't have the electricity and those kind of things that we rely on, that may not always be there, then you're stuck.
So you're saying, I just want to follow up.
Mm-hmm.
You're saying don't embrace new technology, don't embrace the pronto plate or the solar print.
Oh no, I'm.
So you understand how to
Okay.
create without it.
Okay, yeah, I wouldn't say don't embrace it, but I think that at some point, I think that students should be exposed to it at the beginning and then go from there. I mean, I have to teach students what carbon paper is, you know. Well, back in the day, we used this instead of a copy machine. But I think it's important for them to know that history and to know how things work initially, and then they can embrace, you know, the new technology. Yeah, so it's sad to see that a lot of places, I think the University of Maryland, they don't have any stones anymore. And I mean, we had Bavarian stones that were like 30 by 40 inches and amazing stones and things. And that's just totally obsolete now, even though it was obsolete when we were doing it as well. But
Any other questions, comments? A couple.
Yes.
So, right here. Oh, hold on.
Percy, this is really an occasion. The whole event, we go back to high school.
Talking to the microphone.
We go back to high school, and we can attribute what we've accomplished to an art teacher that was there. And her name was Constance Rock. And she was so involved, she would scare me, get that look in her eyes and all that. But she got us started. And not about whether we should go back in time or move forward. The main thing is to move, to go back and forward, and to build on what we learn as we do that. But if we were to go back and stay back, that's nothing. And if we were to go forward without building on experiences, that wouldn't lead to much either. So it's all of that that we put together. And art manifests itself in everything. I consider one of the greatest artists alive that has ever lived as being Hannibal. And nobody's figured out how he got those elephants over the Alps yet, you know. It was creativity, but, you know, it's that art that we bring to things that makes us really special. And that's, to me, what it's about.
So I think we have one more question up here.
Thank you. There are so many people, as well as artists, who don't understand anything about printmaking. I'm just amazed, and they look at it as if it's something so easy to do, and you just make multiples. What can be done to help people understand the intricacies and the real sense of creativity that goes on in printmaking?
I think that they need to see the process. I had a one-person show a year ago, and I had a sip and print, and they forgot to do the reservations and everything, so 40 people showed up, and it was amazing because you're right, people think that they don't really understand the process, and they were printing like crazy. And I think that as printmakers, we need to get out there and show people what we do, because usually we're in a basement experimenting and no one really gets to see a lot of what we do. But once they understand that it's not a photo reproduction, it's you manually put ink on it and you crank it through the press and so forth and so on. So I think it's PR that we need to make people understand that it's not like you have 100 prints. You know, we have an edition of 10, so it's valuable because only 10 people have this print. You know. So.
We have another question.
Hi, Jack. Percy, thank you for the things that you have created and all the artists that you assembled together for this, not only this occasion, but the workshop. I heard so many good things about it, and now we see it, so thank you. I just have one question for you. Your subject matter, your ideas, your narratives are so inviting and so strong. I just want to know where these things come from. I know you're in your own world, and we love that. But can you just speak a moment on where these inspirations come from? Just a little bit.
Here, you want to give him the microphone?
I don't need a mic for this. I don't know. It just comes to me. And, it's a world, and I can tell you right now, I am I think what goes on in this world makes me think, did it ever go on in that world? And if it did, how did they resolve it? And right now, I'm working on a whole series of the person who started a war and lost a war. What was their punishment? I never dealt with it. I never thought about it, but now I am thinking about it. I don't know why, but I'm thinking about it a lot. What happens to someone who does something so awful that something has to be done about it?
Well, can't wait for that. Well, I want to thank you all very much. That was a great discussion.